our interaction with the internet has been discussed in kind of a lot of other sessions through the prism of privacy and the relation of individuals to society. But in this session, we wanted to kind of specifically talk about Facebook through kind of the lens of adulthood, of maturity, and of socialization, what it means to live and interact in society. To discuss these questions, we've invited the panel that's around me. Sitting on your far right is Andrew Keane, founder of Audio Cafe, and author of a great book called Digital Vertigo. Sitting next to him is Aaron Stead, an economics student at the University of Portsmouth and president of their debating society. He's also an alumnus of the debating competition, Debating Matters. Sitting to my right is Victoria Mapplebeck, who is senior lecturer and multimedia director of Royal Holloway, University of London. And sitting furthest on my right is Rob Killick, CEO of the digital agency Clarkswell, founder of, I think, the first UK internet cafe, Siberia, is that right?
Not just me.
A co-founder then. I hope kind of a lot of you were in the plenary in which Andrew Keane suggested that social media was kind of over-generationalized. And I'd kind of like to ask him if fears about young people's interactions online a middle-aged anxiety, or whether or not there's kind of some content, a subject of genuine concern.
What does middle-aged anxiety mean?
Anxiety for people who kind of feel that there's control, something about the internet that they don't understand. Do you think there's a kind of technophobia that goes along with age, and that goes along with kind of new innovation that distances people from the technologies that are increasingly becoming part of everyday life? And do you think that kind of feeds how people discuss young people's interactions online?
Well, give me some examples of middle-age anxiety. I don't know who you're talking about.
There's been kind of media hysteria around trolling and oversharing, around young people putting too much of their personal lives online. Do you share those anxieties?
I'm not keen on this word anxiety. It sounds like it was invented in the Guardian newspaper or something. Because it's a charged word. You're suggesting that anxiety shouldn't really exist, that it's somehow bourgeois. So you could be worried about something, and there's lots of things you can be genuinely worried about. I personally am a critic in some ways of social media, but I don't as you say, I don't generationalize it for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if I did, it undermines my argument. Because if someone like me sits here and says, well, the young people are out of control, they're flaunting themselves on the networks, no one takes me seriously. So I avoid that. But I don't really believe it. I think that everybody's flaunting themselves on the network. So the collapsing of the public and the private is a intergenerational thing. It exists across all age groups. And actually, I think the groups that I'm most positive about are the so-called digital natives. I don't even like that word because it's charged with all sorts of stuff. But you know, the kids like who grew up, I got a 15 and an 11-year-old, the kids who grew up with this stuff, who didn't know anything else, who couldn't imagine a world pre-Facebook, pre-Google, pre-Instagram. I think these are the people who are the most savvy and sophisticated in using this media. I think they're the ones who are going to be most likely to be able to invent new digital identities that, on the one hand, make it seem as if they're revealing themselves on the network, but on the other hand, keeping something in reserve. So I think I think that I'm most optimistic about the younger generation, again, without wishing to over-generationalize the argument. I think that using digital media is complicated. It's very tricky. And I think the people who are best able to use it are the ones who grow up on it, who are intuitively able to understand what you should and shouldn't say. That doesn't mean, of course, that you can always think of lots of examples of bullying, of online suicide, of people flaunting way too much about themselves, of having their lives ruined for stupid photographs or stupid comments. But I think that's kind of Daily Mail territory. You can find that with anything.
Moving on to Aaron, do you think that Facebook's introduced kind of a subtlety to relationships that in some way expand face-to-face relationships that you see in everyday life, or do you think that Facebook is kind of just a tool, kind of no impact on?
I would say this
world?
is something which links back into the generational thing. I think there is a difference in how social media is used between the generations. So I think, so when we started to see social media developing, especially within older generations, it was generally things like Friends Reunited which was used. Whereas today, it's generally a tool to use to link friends a lot closer together. So especially in my generation, I know that it's a tool which basically is used how people would interact in normal everyday life. You generally talk to the people you are closest to on social media. And yes, you might have a load of acquaintances you're supposedly friends with, but you treat them how you would treat an acquaintance. And so if anything, what social media has done is it's augmented or heightened our sense of kind of these relationships between people and made them obvious. Yet, in reality, them relationships are already there. It's just it's more a public display of relationships rather than actually anything new. It's just a mediator, a new forum to be used.
Victoria, I'd like to kind of bring you in, and do you think there's something about how young people use and exploit social media to their own ends that can seem controlless or quite difficult to encroach upon, to engage with? You have done a lot of work in the documentary world. Do you think that online social media is changing how young people conceive of intimacy, see as appropriate to engage with each other? Or do you think that, you know, social media is kind of the same kind of intimacy? Is social media just, you know, a new kind of letter?
I think I agree with Andrew about how, in a way, it's a kind of cross-generational issue that we're facing. I think one of the biggest problems of the sort of oversharing and digital narcissism of the web is the fact that the internet never dies, and so that those traces are there forever. And I was sort of thinking over the weekend about how it's a bit like your decision to get a tattoo. It seems like a good idea on the day, but a decade from now, you may regret your choice of design, you know? And there's a really good Andy Warhol quote where he talks about the worst thing about dying is that people get to go through your embarrassing details, which is what he was talking about, was that shoebox under the bed, which had in all of the incriminating photographs or letters from lovers. And that's still relevant to the day. Apparently Oprah Winfrey has a safe full of letters that she wants destroying when she dies from a past lover. But the difference now is that shoebox is online. And that's something that I think everybody has to be wary of. You know, Sherry Turkle talks about that delete now is a sort of metaphorical term in terms of the internet, you know. It's there forever. And I think my generation are probably more controlling. You know, I'm sort of 40-something and I've got a foot in the analog world and a foot in the digital world. And it probably makes me much more sceptical about the medium. But then I also think I care too much, because I don't think it's the end of the world having a bit of bad press online or a bad photograph or a bad review. And I think my generation, we're so used to a time where we had privacy that we're, you know, very worried about it. So Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan are obsessing in the Leveson inquiry about bad stuff out there. I really envy a younger generation who I think, as Andrew says, are pretty savvy. And I think it's that they just don't care. And I think that's probably quite a liberating place to be, and one I'd like to be. And I'm not.
Bring Rob in at this point. Taking on board kind of what Victoria said, do you think there's value in us being more accountable for ourselves constantly online, or with a permanent record of our interactions with everyone? Do you think it's appropriate that a child's every move should be traceable? I think there's a kind of a problem of control with social media.
Well, ideally that wouldn't be the case, but I don't think we can put that genie back in its bottle. You know, the social media is so pervasive, and there is nothing that's going to turn this back. I think that it's a difficult judgment to make in terms of being a parent, which I am. And I'd just like to say that the last meaningful exchange of views I had about Facebook with my nearly 13-year-old daughter, she told me that I knew nothing about the internet. So I think we have to understand that whatever we as older people might think, young people think we know nothing, and you know, and using their own savvy and everything else to work out how to get the most out of this new world. I think we're going to, as a society, to have to become more forgiving of people's past misdemeanours. And there's something very positive about that. And the story that's in the papers at the moment about the MP whose topless pictures are somewhere in the ether and no doubt in the Sun by Wednesday. Although there's nothing to do with Facebook, but the same principle applies. There's something very positive about some of the response to that, which is that people are saying we're just going to have to get used to the fact that public figures and other people in the future will have a past which people will know about, and so what? We'll just have to accept that they did that when they were young, and now they're not like that anymore. That's quite a mature way of responding to that, and I think it's something that we need to take on board more generally.
If you live online and everyone is kind of a friend, from your mum to your grandma to your old school friends, they're all just a friend. They're all kind of on the same level. Is there a problem that online social media in kind of democratizing and leveling social interactions kind of discounts the specialty of having a real friend?
I think you're wrong to use the word democratization or leveling. I mean, democratization and leveling are the opposite. When you level, you actually create more inequalities. And what you're seeing, and so when you think about social media, you shouldn't just think of Facebook or Twitter or Google+. You're really thinking about the entire network, because every product that's coming out of Silicon Valley is social. Everything, whether it's Netflix or Spotify, they're all designed to be social. They're all designed so that you share everything you do with everybody else. And what is emerging is a new kind of society, a new kind of world. You might think of it as a reputation economy. And the people who will be the most successful are the ones who are the most visible. They're the ones who are able to manufacture their own identities, get the most followers, have the most likes on Facebook, on Instagram, and different kinds of approvals. If you want to imagine this world, you should read Dave Edgar's has a new book out called The Circle. Now, his is a kind of parody and a dystopian take on it, and I'm sympathetic in some ways to what he's saying. But even if you're not a pessimist, not everyone is a pessimist about this world. So it's very different. It's not just about friendship. It's about how we define ourselves. It's about how we distinguish ourselves from others. It's how we get jobs, how we build relationships, how we're remembered. So I think it's wrong to, and I think the result of this will actually be more inequality. You're going to have superstars. You're going to have people who are able to leverage these networks very much to their own benefit.
But the thing is, we've always had that.
Well, you
That's
haven't
the thing.
to that extent.
Well, no, not yeah, but it's heightened it. But we've always
Right.
had that, haven't we? Because you can look back to like the 80s with someone like a very heavily manufactured pop star, like I don't know, like Madonna. There was a manipulation and a growing of reputation. We've always had reputation. That's why kind of in like, I don't know, the 1600s, there was such a big thing about who you marry. Your reputation was whether you had a sword or whether you were a sir or a lord or a peasant. We've always had a reputation economy. This isn't anything new. This is just there may be a heightening of it, and maybe it's allowing more people to be able to change their identity and present themselves how they want to be. But I don't think there's necessarily anything new with that. I think we've always had that.
Well, if you want to go back to the Middle Ages, do you, with aristocrats? Is that an
No, but I'm saying
attractive idea?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, but now what we do is we're allowed to actually choose how we represent ourselves. Whereas back then you were defined by other things. So we've always had this reputation economy, but now you have
But there's a difference
form
between
what
the
that
Middle
is.
Ages, where you were born into certain social strata and it was almost impossible to escape. Whereas this is a much flatter world in a sense, where everyone starts from the same position. There's another really good book called Average is Over by an American economist, just came out, called Tyler Cowen. And again, he points to the fact that there'll only be a tiny group of people who are really able to leverage this system for their benefit, and everybody else will be some sort of underclass. I don't think it's an attractive idea, because I don't want to go back to the Middle Ages of a few aristocrats and the rest of the mob.
I'm not saying go back to the Middle Ages, I'm just saying it's something we've always had. And so what we're doing is we're allowing people, rather than to be defined by what they were born into, we are now, with social media, people are now allowed to be defined by their own ability. And whether people like that or not, is up to other people. And whether you can use that or not, fair enough, but at least you now have a choice. At least you now have an ability to form your appearance rather than before.
Victoria?
But I think in a way it's an illusion of choice, and there's two key differences about reputation and management over the centuries, millennium, is that firstly it has an international reach now, and it's on the World Wide Web, and that it's there forever. Well, as long as the technology can serve it. And in a way it offers control and it takes control away. So Justin Bieber, unlike the sort of stars in the Hollywood system, is able to stage manage, you know, to be part of this kind of reputation economy. But then he goes to the Anne Frank Museum and he writes, Anne was a great girl, I'm sure she'd have been a believer. And he's suddenly at the wrong end of that reputation management, and suddenly the whole Holocaust museum industry is up in arms about how he could say something so trite, and presumably his, you know, PR company weren't so happy. So it's a, you know, it's a push-pull relationship. It's a dangerous world, and you know, there's also technology that is coming up in response to that kind of reputation management. In the Snapchat is now there for people who want to send rude pictures of one another, and it disappears instantly. But the technology is cyclical, so then they create Snap Hack, which actually finds a way of bypassing it. There's Reputation.com, which celebrities can use, or people, actresses, actors, people in the public profile, who can actually have an identity management trying to go through and change their thing. So the technology will just keep on developing to sort of undermine that process of seeking control. So I think it's better for a generation to be savvy about the lack of control. So.
Well, I think we're in danger of getting a bit carried away in terms of the importance of social media in general. And I, having observed this process over a period of 20 years, I actually would challenge anybody to come up with any substantial social or economic change which has come about as a result of the impact of social media on society. You know, a lot of claims have been made, but the reality is that a lot of the time it's just a quicker way of talking about not very much with a lot of people. And the claims that are made for it in terms of political change and everything else in countries around the world have all collapsed, as you know, been thinking about the Arab Spring, have all collapsed because in the face of real social and economic advantage, being able to talk to somebody about it is insufficient. And I would actually point people, if they're really, to a really brilliant article by Malcolm Gladwell about the civil rights movement in America in the 1960s, where he points out what is necessary to execute real change in society, the level of organisation and politics and agreement and everything else between people, which which social media has never approximated to anywhere ever.
I think it can be difficult to bring in large, and often external social processes like the Arab Spring, in the sense of what it means to be in a public and a reforming of a public in the Middle East. Social media can be very good at kind of reflecting things that are happening way beyond it, that have content that's external to the medium itself. But when we are looking kind of specifically at the technology itself and its effect on what happens, surely there's kind of a content deficit in a sense. It's always going to be social media, and the use of it is always going to be parasitic to broader social processes. But I'd like to raise the question with the panel as to whether or not Facebook somehow means that we, look at the wrong things when we look at each other acting in public.
No. I mean, social media is us, right? That's what we choose to put on our stuff. Now, that might mean we're inane, and most of us are. Or it might mean we're trivial and superficial and narcissistic and all the rest of it. But this idea that you're suggesting that there's a choice and that social media is somehow a conspiracy against us, I think is wrong. I think it's us. It's what we choose to have. When we post on Facebook, when we have a Twitter feed, when we put stuff up on all these other networks, we're choosing to do it. Nobody's forcing us. I just want to respond to Rob in one sense. I think he's right in some ways that social media is exaggerated, but there's one thing it's not exaggerated. There's one area where it really is very important, and that's in economic terms. Now, whatever one thinks of Facebook, it's still a $100 billion company. whatever one thinks of Twitter, it's about to go public at about a $15 billion IPO. And I think what social media is doing is transforming advertising. And what it's doing is, and I write about this in a lot of detail in my book, I'm not the first or the last person to write about this, it's packaging us up as data and leveraging our data, and in some ways perhaps exploiting our data for the profit of these tiny little companies. And these are real things. You know, $100 billion is enough money, and that money is coming from other sectors of the media economy and is going to a tiny group of technologists. So I think that's very real, and I think it's very real in the way that it's personalizing the advertising industry and transforming media into a data industry, a big data industry. And of course, it's very much bound up in the surveillance of this economy. The more these companies know about us, the more valuable we become because they can sell us to advertisers. Eric Schmidt of Google said his goal was that Google should know us better than we know ourselves, and he's well on the way. I think Google in particular. Google's in many ways a much worse company than Facebook because it's much more powerful. But Google's very much on the way to achieving that.
If they have all the data, do they know things about us that are worth knowing?
Well, I think there are a lot of, particularly, and this may be true of a younger generation, but true generally is most people don't understand the way these businesses work. That's why I do the work I do, to expose what they're up to. The cleverest of these social media companies, Google in particular, and to some extent Facebook, dress themselves up as public utilities. They present themselves as existing for the public good. So Mark Zuckerberg always talks about founding Facebook so that everyone would be connected and everyone could realize some sort of democracy or justice. I think it's very important for people to understand the way in which they are in many ways being exploited. And when they begin to, LinkedIn, for example, I'm not on most of the networks, but I am on LinkedIn because it's quite valuable in some ways from a professional point of view. But LinkedIn endlessly spies on me. LinkedIn knows that the suggested friends are so accurate that the only way in which it can know who I should make contacts with is because it's reading my emails. And I find that very disconcerting. In fact, now there's a big legal case in America of people going after LinkedIn because they're claiming the same thing. I think most people don't want that. Most people don't want to be spied on endlessly, even if they may not be revealing life-destroying secrets. It's still very uncomfortable to have somebody always over your shoulder.
Rob?
Well, I think there's a line which I would want to draw, and unfortunately that line has been crossed many times. But I'd want to draw a line between information about myself and data, because I don't think they're the same thing. You know, if the government, for example, wanted to work out how many people had suffered from a certain type of disease in a certain country in a certain period, I think that would be legitimate, that they would ask the medical profession for how many cases there were. They wouldn't be talking about individuals. There would be nothing like that. That kind of analysis of data is legitimate, and it's legitimate in the commercial sphere as well. Because, you know, why shouldn't supermarkets know how many people are buying the certain types of stuff? Because then it means they're going to order more. You know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think information about yourself as an individual is different. And, you know, I've felt for a long time that most of us gave up far too easily when we signed up for Facebook and LinkedIn and everything else, and allowed in that very act of signing up our information to be examined. And I think that, you know, I would argue all the time that there should be an opt-in and an opt-out button for the sharing of personal information. Now, you may feel very happy about sharing your personal information, and that's fine, and that should be a conscious decision that you make when you go into one of these social media forums. But if you don't want to, then your information should remain private, and really private. And you know, it should actually be possible for you to wipe that information off any time you like, from you know, when you feel like it. You should be able to take that information off. Now, that's not going to help the first problem we talked about, because often that information will have already flown away somewhere through other social media. But at least it gives you some control over what you are publishing in what is effectively a public space.
How many
So
of you-
I'd make that distinction.
Do you think, do our panel think you could ever be too young to have Facebook? Do you think there's a time when you just shouldn't be able to have that information taken from you, your knowledge? Surely Rob's raised an issue of consent that can be quite troubling.
I think there's a good quote by Sherry Turkle, who works at MIT, and she says, just because we've grown up on the internet doesn't mean that the internet is grown up. And I think it's being constantly discerning about the repercussions of putting your personal information up there and recognising the kind of limits of that is really important. And I think that's something you can teach younger people. And just doing some research for the session, I thought there was 2 very good examples recently about the good and the bad of Facebook. And one of the bad ones was a woman who had married a guy with prostate cancer who had subsequently died, and his Facebook site became part of that whole culture of cyber mourning. And she got so pissed off with the sort of mawkish and sentimental quality of all the Facebook users constantly wanting to commemorate his birthdays and the day that he was at Glastonbury and the day of his death, when she was, in terms of a grieving process, needing to forget, that she defriended him, to then instantly regret it because, of course, she couldn't get back on. So she lost access to all of that archive. But then there was a woman writing in The Guardian just last week in the family section talking about her son who died in a bike accident. And he'd been on Facebook since he was 10. And that all of those digital traces, she turned it into a book, which she found really valuable. He was a young filmmaker, so he had lots of YouTube and Vimeo clips. And she felt she had a wealth of a 3-dimensional portrait of him that was really precious to her. So there just isn't this sort of technological determinist view of it's good, it's bad. It's just having that awareness of what a complex and slippery being it is.
No, but there is, I do, especially coming back to the age thing, there surely must be an age. Because we do all agree within a legal context at least, there's a legal age of culpability, there's a legal age where you can consent to have sex. And so, especially with giving away data, I mean, I disagree with Rob in many regards, but I do agree with the whole wiping thing. But there is a market for data. And to be honest, Facebook, it costs money for Facebook to work. And so the way they make their money back is by selling data. And so you almost buy into it by giving away data. And it sounds quite harsh and tough, but you're almost buying a service with your data. It's just you're using a different thing other than money to use this service. And everyone's chosen to do that. And we do all it, and we legally.
They haven't.
And
People,
socially.
that's where you're wrong. People haven't chosen to. Because how many of you are on social media?
You do
No.
know.
Well, let's do this. How many of you are on social media? Okay, so practically everyone. How many of you, before you signed up, read the terms of service?
But the thing is,
well, let me finish. The point is that people don't know it, and it's not made explicit because these social media companies are marketing themselves in ways that's not clear. So,
people do know. But people do know that there must be something to gain, and people do know that data is there. And I think it's very naive to think just because someone hasn't read through all the terms and conditions that they don't understand that Facebook is getting something out of them.
Okay. We're going to go out to the audience because I see a show of hands.
I quite agree with what's been said about technology and social media being very much a tool. It's a human invention. It's not like a arbitrary thing that's been forced on us. People have decided to build it. People have decided to use it. I do think there was an element of controversy and privacy involved in that, but I do think that there's often a very cynical view, and people don't really think of the future of social media. They just think of, more and more privacy violations, but there's also a positive side in the future, I think. Particularly if you look at like the current situation with elderly, a lot of them are very isolated on their own and losing contact with family and friends due to people losing time in like the new age of people working for longer hours. And I think that social media, like you said with Friends Reunited, could end up being used in the future. This generation, when they're older, and when they're no longer able to work or move around as often, they've got all these friends and memories they can access very easily. And I think that's just one of many positive future benefits you could have.
Right.
So I think that it could be very interesting to see what happens.
Hi. First of all, I'd like to ask Andrew, what are you scared of giving away? Because we know what we're putting on there. We know that we put our name, we put our date of birth. If we want, we can put our school, we can put our previous school, we can put where we work. We know that we're putting that data on there. It's not as if it's in the terms and
But
conditions, like you
We're
said.
going to take all the
But
answers.
but it's all things that we sign up to do. Additionally, the whole question about children having to grow up and mature to realise what they're putting on Facebook.
Yeah.
Facebook is what you make of it. Facebook is, and all the other social media for that point. You don't have to put your whole life story on there for you to have a social presence. And also, additionally, for my third point, the whole question about do you have a completely neutral, flat connection with all of your friends as soon as they become friends as opposed to best friends or mums or dads? No, my sister is definitely still my sister on Facebook. She's still got the same surname as me. She still looks like me. My best mates are all my best mates on Facebook, even though they say friends. Like, I don't have to put them in a group that says, these are my best friends, just so everyone knows I have best friends.
Hi there. I want to bring the conversation back to the public square, which I think is an interesting topic to unpack, because I guess I'm still of the generation where I just view Twitter as a technology I use. It's very fun and kind of interesting, but I'll leave it alone if it doesn't concern me. I guess for maybe people who are younger, it does represent an extension of the public sphere and this kind of square. It's a place publicly to have out thoughts and discussions. It's used for learning and debate, and that frightens me because it worries me that the public sphere is this frothing, shrieking, censorious madhouse where as soon as somebody says anything which transgresses some kind of vague, undefined speech code, they get piled in on. And I also get slightly worried about a world where so-called kind of radicals cheer on hacking groups such as Anonymous or 4chan as these kind of countercultural renegades railing against business and hacking. Because I get slightly worried about the fact that politics essentially gets outsourced to essentially bedsit masturbators. Those things really start to concern me when I look, going forward. I realise it's not a purely technological question. So the question that I kind of want to understand is, do we have to start working out, etiquette for, the likes of Twitter or whatever social media as existing in the public sphere? Do we have to get rid of the distinction between the online and the offline worlds, or do we need to fiercely defend that distinction?
In terms of the have I consented to having my information kind of taken by Facebook and sold to the highest bidder, I certainly knew I did when I signed up when I was 14 because it was made very, very clear to me. It's not made clear to other people, that's definitely true. And putting that onus onto Facebook or Google is very difficult, so let's put it onto our education system. And as parents, say to your kids, if you sign up, Google isn't a free service. Nothing is. There's no such thing as, free lunch or whatever. I am doing a degree. I am so glad Google exists for doing my degree because it makes my life 10 times easier than having to go to a library for everything. And actually, I am perfectly willing to give a company enough information to advertise targetedly at me so I might actually buy something that I want in order to use that service. And I think as long as that trade-off is made public, and we don't need Google to do that, we're perfectly capable of doing that ourselves, I just don't see the problem.
Just to go back to young people and the permanence of what we do on the internet, I was wondering if the panel had any thoughts about how sort of remarks and expressions made on the internet, like flippant tweets and such, are they ever relevant to, a child's education? Is it ever in order for a school, a university to take that into account when they are assessing a child, even further into the future, a workplace? Is that an invasion of privacy, or is there still is that still part of the public realm?
Yeah, just following on from the last comment, actually, I sort of am old enough to remember when the internet was thought of as a free hippie zone where you could do what you like, and it was like freedom and no one could control anything at all. And now we're just paranoid that we're being watched constantly. And anybody who thinks that that's not the case and that thinks that people are naive and think it's still free is very much sort of living in a dream world, because the idea that Google sells information about us to different governments, or whenever they are requested to, not sell it, but requested to give it to them for issues of security, has been in the news enough to know that that's just the case, that's the way it is. And would be no surprise that that's what's going on. GCHQ and snooping and all the rest of it, that's the world we live in. So, but the issue for me is, as an individual, it does impinge upon you when freedom is attacked because it's too free. The internet is too free, so therefore we need to be wary and watchful. We need to be careful that our employers are watching us. Everybody's watching us, so we have to put the shutters up So that's the world we really live in, and that's what we're dealing with. And I think everybody is fully aware of it. We just don't quite know the answers of how to deal with it individually.
I was thinking about the term bedsit masturbators that came up at the back there. And I was thinking, it reminded me, there's an Adam Curtis quote, you know, he's written a lot, he's very anti-Twitter and Facebook. And he is worried, you know, he was sort of saying if aliens ever came down and looked at our world in terms of the digital threads of all of that, they would just think we were absolute narcissists because everybody's in this moment of sharing where they are and how they feel right now, every second. And I'm torn because coming from a culture of documentary and starting in the late 80s when a lot of the really key documentaries were about the public world and hardly any pre-Paul Watson's A Family were about the private world, I think there's been a really great shift to autobiography, and some of the best films I've seen in documentary, the most original and creative stories, have been those authored personal stories. And I think we're very culture bound on our kind of responses, and it's quite a middle-aged reaction, a sort of real sort of knee-jerk reaction against personal stories and oversharing and digital narcissism. And I think it's very culture bound. There was a really good news night about a year ago with Joanne Harris, who was saying when men write about the personal realm, we call it social commentary, and when women do, we call it chick lit. So I just think it's something, I don't do Facebook and I don't do Twitter because I don't want to share, you know, the fact that the train's late and that kind of minutiae of my existence. But I am making a very autobiographical project at the moment that's about text messages in my mobile over 3 years. And it's the most personal story I've ever had to work with. And so I'm sort of pro and against, but I do think there's a very strong cultural reaction we have to autobiography and sort of personal storytelling. And I think we should be somewhat circumspect about where it comes from.
There has to be a cultural change in the way we think about people's pasts if we're going to persist with social media, because I don't think, you know, a group of 17-year-old girls on their first trip to Magaluf or whatever, getting drunk, being topless on the beach, you know, putting all that in photos, putting it on Facebook and everything else, are doing that so they can impress a future employer. They're not, you know, that is not there. Now, either it has to be there, right? It has to, people have to learn from a very early age that everything that they do in social media is basically doing it in public, right? Yeah. Or else, as a society, we have to become much more forgiving, right? Or somewhere in the middle, right? Because obviously we're still at quite an early stage of this whole thing. It isn't very long. I can't remember, how long is Facebook and MySpace? Is it 10 years even? I think.
Well, yeah.
It's a very short period of time in social development, and we don't yet know how this is going to play out. But what we do have to know is that it will play out, and it's not going to go away. So we all have to constantly examine our attitudes towards this. And I think the problem is that the younger you go, the harder it is to make that judgment. And I think, you know, as Aaron said, we don't let our children do lots of things in public, right? We don't let them go off to bars on their own when they're 12 years old. We don't let them drive cars. We know that they're not physically and mentally ready for that. But somehow or other, we think that they are actually physically and mentally ready to engage in a public discourse with the rest of society through social media. That's quite tough, you know, to imagine how you reconcile that kind of contradiction. You know, I'm actually, as anyone who knows me will say, quite a libertarian person, but I do not yet allow my nearly 13-year-old daughter to have a smartphone. Right? I know, I'm sure that's wrong, you know, and everything, but I have to, you know, that's the judgment I am currently making, and I'm under no illusion that as soon as she goes round her friend's house or whatever, that's the first thing that's going on. But I feel that I have to be seen to be exercising some parental judgment in this, and to say, actually, I don't think you're ready to be part of this. And, you know, for the reasons that I've said, that you're basically operating in an adult public sphere when you're not really ready for that. And I think some of that is actually something we just have to say, knowing that it's going to be ignored, but at some point it'll come back and they'll remember, oh yeah, actually Dad was right, oh God, you know, that kind of thing. But, you know, we are at the early stage of this, and I think it's going to be very fascinating to see how this plays out.
I agree with the whole kind of, we're at a very early stage, and I think there will be an equilibrium which will kind of tend towards. I don't think it's kind of this almost apocalypse. But coming on to the whole kind of snooping point, and I think it's actually quite naive in one way to kind of go off on this whole thing about kind of GCHQ, because yes, it does happen, but are we really naive enough to think that before the internet that the mail wasn't intercepted and that phone calls haven't been intercepted, and that actually we weren't snooped on before? And the majority of the stuff we stick online actually is mundane Instagram photos of a donut we ate last week. Like, that's no interest to anyone in reality. We need to be a lot more forgiving. But we've always had people making fools of themselves in public. For example, Ed Balls once went to a party at uni dressed as a Nazi, and it was published in the Oxford University's newspaper. Like, we've always had people make fools of themselves in public. And this may just be a new forum for that, and we may have new things, but we've dealt with all these things before. I think social media has become a moral panic, whereby people are kind of overreacting and sensationalizing things. But in reality, we've had technological advances like these before, and we've eventually come to some sort of equilibrium level where people are happy with it. And yes, we are in very early stages, and we will eventually, surely, be a lot more rational eventually at some point.
Again, I have to disagree. We haven't been at this point. There's this, I always hear this idea, oh, we've always dealt with these. Maybe it's an English attitude. You always can get over stuff. It's not true. We haven't been at this point before. We haven't been at a point where, as Rob says, a 17-year-old girl who goes to Spain and posts a topless picture of themselves while they're drunk, or maybe while they were drunk, will leave that legacy forever to everybody in the world. We've never been at that point before. Now, a girl might go to Spain and might take that photo historically, and at worst, but before, at worst, a few people might see that photo. So this is an entirely different situation, and I'm not convinced by your optimism. I mean, this idea of reaching an equilibrium is terribly vague. What does it mean?
So to go on to the snooping point, we've had...
go back to let's go back to the example of the topless girl.
Do that quickly, and then we're going to go back out to the audience.
I mean,
the point's been made. Yeah.
So in the past, we've come up eventually with ways of restricting... although I don't really like restricting, but anyway, we've come up with ways of restricting and managing things like intercepting phone calls and that sort of thing in the past, and how we deal with data and new developments technologically. And I think it's very naive to think that actually we're stuck with this situation, and this situation is never going to change. Okay. And this is what we've got.
I strongly disagree. Can I just respond? Someone said, "What am I scared of?"
Very quickly. What are you scared of?
I'm not scared. I mean, someone was saying, "What are you scared of in terms of this stuff?" And I'm not really scared of anything. What annoys me about it is that I'm not rewarded for this stuff. So if I'm going to post something on Facebook, I'm not on Facebook, but if I was to post something on Facebook, it irritates me that somebody else should be profiting from my creative work. So if I'm going to be rewarded economically for that post, I'm maybe more interested in participating.
Pick up on a point that Victoria made, which I think is very trenchant. You talked about your comparison with not saying you're late for your train, posting that, and your autobiographical project. And I think that, for me, is a crucial issue. I mean, I'm very inexperienced with both Facebook and Twitter. I've tried both. But I find them utterly boring because they're so superficial. And it seems to me that superficiality is inevitable. And what I'm worried about, and what I'd like the panel's views on, is will this impact on the way people relate to each other? If I think of my own relationships, they're graded, if you like. My most intimate relationships are those people often I've known for a long time, where I can be totally myself. I don't have to worry about making a mistake because they know me so well, they can put that in context. And that's graded up until I have a public persona, where I'm very involved in impression management. And it seems to me that at the Facebook level, you're involved in impression management. So the amount of real, intimate expression you can make is extremely limited. Now, if people are engaging a great deal in that kind of interaction, will it impact on the way they view relationships?
Okay, thank you.
in my view, there are no grown-ups on the internet. It seems to be these sites celebrate childishness, echoing the point about Anonymous. You know, there's a lot of like playground bullying, knee-jerk reactions. We're not allowed to grow up. And I think the longer we stay on sites like Facebook, the more we have a kind of arrested development.
I quite agree with Aaron in the way that we shouldn't like focus too much on the negativity, and we should focus more on the benefit that bring from social media platform like Twitter and Facebook. Because things like I study abroad, so the way that I keep in touch with my friend in Vietnam, like half the world, like is from Facebook. And also on Facebook, I subscribe to Harvard Business Review. I subscribe to my employer. So the things like from Facebook, I know like okay, I can learn a lot more because usually Harvard Business Review they just send out like on the best article about like philosophy, about like strategy, about like business.
So we're taking a very dystopic view. So I'm very interested in the panel's ideas with regards to when it comes to public sphere, some of the benefits, especially with regards to creativity, exposure to new ideas, the freedom to put what you create out there to a very, very large audience, the ability to build a community around what you create. So I'd be very interested in what you think on those items.
To the kind of quite misanthropic pessimism for humans using social media, I think I just brought up Facebook now just to see what kind of terrible things I'm being inflicted with. And I've seemed to get adverts for Guide to Bodybuilding, Girls on Facebook, and Carphone Warehouse. So they've like managed to realise that I'm an under 30-year-old male. Well done, Facebook.
I'm kind of insulted saying that Facebook is full of inanity because it's no more inane than people being in the pub and having a conversation. So thank you very much for condemning my friends and our conversations online in that way. It isn't. It's not. There are inane people in pubs, and there are people that are interesting and show you interesting articles and refer you to concerts and you discuss politics. So I think just back off. Thank you very much. But I also think that maybe we could talk about a migration away from, say, for example, conventional television towards something like Facebook, and whether there's a real difference between having adverts sent to us via the TV and having things coming our way via Facebook. But then the other point I wanted to make was about what aspect of ourself is it that we project? Because it is a projection, it is impression management. We're trying to entertain each other. In the same way that the character down the pub was always trying to be entertaining, that's kind of what Facebook does. And people, I'm sure we all delete things when we haven't quite worded it as wittily as we want to, and that kind of thing. And we send photographs of our children or our friends because we're trying to entertain each other. Now, I don't know the significance of that, whether there's something terrible about us all becoming people who want to become sort of celebrities or public personas in a kind of entertaining kind of way to our friends, or whether there's a whole other dimension of life that still remains relatively untouched by it, where it's much more sincere.
First of all, Rob, you're concerned about your children being part of an adult public realm. Young people, if they don't know about it, won't consciously get themselves involved. And there's all these things about they can expose themselves to semi-nudity for things like that. Does anyone know the Lad Bible here? Like, Cleavage Thursdays is one of the highlights of my week, not going to lie. So, but it doesn't matter that happens because children won't expose themselves to that if they don't know about it. And if they do expose themselves to that, people can see when they've, liked one of their pictures or something like that. And the kids will have that realisation. It's exactly the same thing as the kids having a porno mag underneath their bed and not wanting their mum or dad to find out. Andy, the other thing about your creative output on Facebook, I politely murmured under my breath that a status is not a poem. And if you have anything creative to put on Facebook, well, you don't. Because Facebook is, like this lady very rightly said, is to entertain your friends and yourself. It's about your own amusement. I don't put things on Facebook to try and get a record deal. I put it there so I can maybe make connections with people. I don't expect to be paid for every status I write.
Well, I think some of the panel, maybe Andrew, has got a bit of a short memory because credit rating agencies have for years collected enormous amounts of information about you and even people you live with or want to live with. And, it's extraordinary detail about, their shopping habits and family members and so on. So I agree that what we are experiencing today is of a different order, but we have been passing, in a sort of underhand way, without our knowing, information about ourselves for quite some time. But the other thing is, just quickly about data and what we share. I don't really have a problem per se of, kind of revealing what I say on Twitter right now, but it's really the future that worries me about correlation, because I don't particularly trust the state in particular about drawing new connections about what I've said in the past tomorrow. Because they, as we know, have very changing political agendas where one day as a Muslim you said something innocuous, and then tomorrow, all Muslims are a potential terrorist threat and I'm going to revise what you said in the past. So that's where it becomes problematic, and this kind of idea of correlation, in particular around authorities in the state who we know, act in a very sort of mistrustful sort of fashion.
I had a real moment of I don't know if it's middle-aged or what kind of, it's an anxious moment. We're all having a family night in on a Saturday night watching the same programme together. Thought, oh, lovely. And I look round, my husband's got his iPad out, my son's on his Nexus, and my daughter's on FB on her Apple phone. And I said, well, that's just bloody great, isn't it? I said, just go off to your rooms if you don't want to be with me. And my daughter looked at me astonished and said, don't be daft, Mum, I want to sit with you. I don't want to go up on my own and be on my phone. And it really, that kind of just brought home to me that there must be something kind of perhaps a bit, I don't know, I thought it was new, and then I thought to my own self at 13 or 14 or 15, sitting in a room with parents, well, often mentally I wasn't there. I might have been physically there, but I was daydreaming. I was certainly, the number of times you get dragged off to family things and you're not actually mentally there. And I thought, oh, well, all right, and I just told myself, relax about it, just don't get so het up. But I think what I was questioned, Rob, when you talk, and well, to everybody really, but I can see how it's a public arena, but it also seems very private to the people who use it. They kind of use it, if I go anywhere near my daughter when she's on her phone, just get away, Mum, it's like it's her private thing. And I get worried when you have schools feeling that they've got the right to, look at their pupils' Facebook I don't know, what do you call it? Facebook account. Thank you. I don't think they should have that right at all.
Okay.
So I'm worried. And the other thing about the public, when past forms of public, sorry, I'll be really brief, politics or sex or what have you, they had kind of rituals and they had kind of things you did a bit more collectively. There were other adults who had experience, who could guide you. And I just wonder, it's not a call for regulation of Facebook, but are they not just a little bit more alone when they're doing that?
There's one interesting book that's been written called Present Shock by a New York thinker called Douglas Rushkoff. And his argument about all this social, and this comes back to some of the comments about inanity. I'm not sure so much that it's so much inane as the tyranny of the moment. The tyranny of social media is the tyranny of the present. Everything is immediate, and then we instantly forget. It's ironic because on the one hand, social media doesn't forget, so that all those topless photos exist forever. We've got to figure out how to teach the internet how to forget. But in terms of the use of social media, everything is instantly forgettable. So something trends on Twitter, and it's huge news, and everyone's madly commenting on it, and then 20 seconds later, it's instantly forgotten. So on the one hand, we need to figure out a way of reintroducing memory into discourse, into the way in which we talk to one another, and understand that the immediate is problematic in lots of ways and doesn't enable us to think either of the future or of the past. But on the other hand, we need to teach the internet how to forget. So I think memory and forgetting are really important in terms of this discussion.
Listening to the comments is very interesting because there's a kind of normal human response to new things, which is to either say that it changes everything or it changes nothing. And we've had both of those responses today, and I think neither of them are appropriate for this. And I take, for example, the comment about pornography. Anybody who thinks that 20 years ago that access to pornography was the same as it is now is totally deluded. All right? Now, you may argue, well, so what? Fine, that's fine. But you have to accept that something has changed. Now, the interesting thing, and I think this is true of a lot of this discussion, the question is, does quantity in the end change quality? In other words, is the proliferation of social media, the maximisation of communication, is it in the end going to change things in fundamental ways? I personally don't see that at the moment, but that doesn't mean that at some point it might not. But I think we all have to be open to the fact that something is happening and that it's something that we have to think about. And that, the points that I do think that all of us have to really take on board the whole point about not that society can't judge people by what they did when they were teenagers, which is really a big problem, or even later than that. I mean, we've gone to great lengths in human civilization to create cities as places where you can go to escape from who you used to be, right? And now seem to be in a situation where there's no escape from who you used to be. That there is no way that you can really reinvent yourself without having to constantly explain and apologise for who you used to be. Now that is new, right? And I don't know what the impact of that is going to be on society, but that is new. And I think that we have to keep in mind that things do change, but they don't change absolutely in any really quick way.
I wanted to come back to the gentleman where you were asking about what effect this is going to have on relationships, I guess, the way that we use and abuse new technologies. And Sherry Turkle, who has written this great book called Alone Together, which I really recommend, has done one of the biggest sort of sociological surveys about how teenagers use both text and Facebook. And there's a great anecdote where she talks about a 40-something career woman turning up at a New York flat to interview a potential nanny, and she wants to see her sort of in situ and get a sense of her life. And her flatmate opens the door and she's got bandaged thumbs because she's done so much repetitive strain injury on her mobile. And she says, oh, could you just knock for Sarah? I'd like to have a quick chat with her. And she goes, I couldn't knock. I couldn't possibly knock on her door. I'll text her. And I think there is a lot of interesting debates about the way, certainly the teenagers that Sherry Turkle interviews are talking about how utterly freaked out they are by phone calls because they're live and spontaneous and you hear the pregnant pause or you hear someone sounding pissed off, and how much they want to sort of hone those communications. They want them to have an illusion of spontaneity, but to be much more controlling about them. And I think that's a sad state of affairs. And I don't think it's a great medium. The big emotional dialogues we're having, particularly by text message, which is what my current project's about, it's not a great medium. The medium is not right for the message to have big emotional conversations.
Cool. Aaron? Yeah, I think that I'd agree in part, but I'd say that the best medium has always been in person. And no matter whether it was through text or whether you write a letter or a phone call, it's never really the same as being able to sit there and see someone's facial expressions. And so the point raised about inanity, actually I think that I totally agree. You can be inane on Facebook, you can be inane in the pub. It's just a new forum and it's a new way. And obviously there are benefits of social media, the ability to kind of organise events and kind of you don't have to kind of ring 9 different people at once and you can have. But in the same way, it's just a new forum of doing what we've always done. It's not particular. It's groundbreaking in one sense, but in another sense, what's inane online will be inane in real life, and what's really interesting online will be interesting in real life.
You said that in the future, to be successful, you need to build an identity through social media. Does that mean that in the future we won't actually have a choice but to engage in social media and give away our data if we want to be successful?
This is a quick response to the comment about the lad Bible and also a bit of regulation. So Facebook is criticised heavily for being incredibly sexist, and the regulations are incredibly sexist. So Facebook will take off private photos of women breastfeeding or like anatomical, I think that was the right word, diagrams of a vagina because apparently that's inappropriate. However, they are public pages called vile things like simply arse and tits or, sites that involve jokes about domestic abuse and rape and are quite sexually explicit, but somehow fall under a banner of humour. So these public things are allowed, but then they go into private photos of things that we would find acceptable. Yep. So it is harmful to people, and also there's the idea of regulation on the private public.
I'm sure I'm not the only person that when Facebook started, I joined it at least 4 different times with different profiles. Eventually, of course, because you have to sort of manage 4 or 5 email accounts, 4 or 5 Facebook accounts, etc., and keep your photographs and everything. So you end up sort of coming down to just being the one person again. But it was kind of a bit of fun involved in that. It's a bit like sort of being a sort of a David Bowie. You know, you can reinvent yourself as often as you like. These days, of course, the whole notion of fictional online identities is only ever really thought about in terms of dirty old men pretending to be teenage girls in order to go into sort of teen forums and things like that. So basically, my question is really about the potential, or possibly what seemed to be potential, probably very trivial, but all the same, of experimenting with how to be, which was made possible by social media. Obviously, it's not about experimenting with what to do so much as how to be. But is there still any potential left in terms of experimentation with fictional personalities?
But this is in conclusion. I think the young lady asked a really good question about whether we need to be on social media. Unfortunately, or for better or worse, and it's probably in some ways for worse, you do. And I think the challenge for all of us, but particularly younger people, is how you're going to curate yourselves. The curation of the self is one of the central issues in our digital society, and it's relevant in 2 ways. Firstly, the success in the way in which you curate yourself will reflect your own success and happiness in your life, job success, educational success, relationship success. But secondly, and I think this is really interesting, for the first time, we really are able to leave ourselves, our curated self, to the unborn, to generations that that don't exist. I was lucky enough to know my grandparents quite well. I didn't know my great-grandparents. I certainly didn't know my great-great-grandparents. Future generations, my great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will know me through this electronic media. So it changes the way in which we think about ourselves and our legacy. We'll never really die, for better or worse. And that's, again, why I think the way in which the maturity, the sophistication, the responsibility of curating ourselves will become increasingly one of the central things in which we live with. And when we die, we'll think, what kind of legacy have we left? Not in vague terms, but actually in the concrete way in which what we've done in our lives are recorded on media. We call it social media. All digital media is social.
For once, I think I kind of agree with a large portion of what you just said there.
Only a large, not all of it.
Yeah, that's something which is going to be very interesting, the aspect that it's going to be there forever. But that also then, I think, raises the questions about growing up in an environment with this. Growing up in an environment with social media, it brings back down, when do we say it's okay? Who can have consent? And I think that, therefore, social media, although we need to be careful of what we put online. We need to be careful, we can't be naive about it, but it's actually just another manifestation, maybe a heightened manifestation of what was already there.
I think my concluding comments, I wanted to pick up on a couple of the little debate within the audience when you were saying, I think, that the Facebook was very much about arrested development and that it's so kind of facile and adolescent. And I thought it was a really interesting point from the woman who was saying, but we do that small talk in the pub. But in the pub, it's not so much about that relentlessly upbeat reputation management, you know? I remember I was reading a great quote recently about somebody who said, I didn't feel I could say my dog had died on Facebook. So Facebook, I think, is such a simplistic avatar. A lot of my 20-something undergrad students have got really pissed off with it because when they're on it, they come off feeling like shit, that everybody's having a better life than theirs because it's just a ridiculous one-dimensional spin. It's showing off on a sort of grand digital scale. And I think that's very much its limitations, that it's I don't mind the narcissism and the sharing, but that it is so one-dimensional as a way of saying something about your life.
Well, I think there are 3 things that we need to try and bear in mind all at the same time when confronted with this, and where, if possible, we should be trying to insist that that things need either to change or be adapted. I think the first is there should be a maximum amount of control and personal autonomy in terms of the ownership of information. Secondly, that there should be privacy. There should be places where you can communicate where that isn't going to be opened up to the world. And I think that we have to exhibit tolerance towards the sort of mistakes that people make. And I think that for me there's a battle here. I don't mean this one, but there is a battle here for the future. It's not. I don't agree with Andrew that we're all in the grip of evil corporations or anything. They're businesses, but I think that there are things that we can do. There are principles that we should be trying to live by, which will influence the way that the whole thing turns out. Because as somebody said, these are just tools, right? And like any other tools, it depends how we use them.
And thank you very much.